Well, welcome to the panel, Memory and the Speed of Data. I'm Matt Gold, I'll be moderating. We have 4 wonderful speakers today. Presentations will take 15 minutes each, and then we'll leave time for questions. I've asked the panelists to introduce themselves since they can do a better job than I can, and we're just going to go in the order of the program. So first up is Lev Manovich, Understanding the Data Stream. Yes.
Yes. Hi, I'm now a professor of computer science. I'm now professor of computer science here at the Graduate Center, just been here 1 month, and I try to adjust to many interesting events happening. So my presentation is a kind of extension of the first part of this article which I put online a couple of months ago. So we'll see how far ahead it's posted, called Data Stream Database Timeline Reforms of Social Media. The interiors of Buddhist temples in medieval cathedrals, store displays, books, newspapers, magazines, cinema, manga, museums, car dashboard, wayfinding system, airports, email and chat blogs, social networks, and every other communication media organize information in distinct ways, creating particular user experiences. Now, this information design patterns specify how information is presented visually and spatially, how it is updated in time, and how users can interact with information. Some of these information design patterns are unique to particular communication technologies. Others are more general and shared by multiple technologies. We can call such shared patterns the forms of information. So in my talk, I will briefly discuss what I see as 3 perhaps most common information forms of web-based social networks and media sharing sites: a data stream, a database, and a timeline. So this presentation is an update of my paper, my article which was published in '98 about databases in symbolic form, right, which talked about what I saw as emerging form of database based on the Web 1.0. So this is exactly 15 years later. So people still quoting this article, it's like, guys, things change. It's been 15 years, right? Which means 50 million years in web time. So this is going to be the beginning of a kind of update, right? So in 2000s, the web was reshaped by new economic, social, technological forces, such as web commerce, right? Amazon, iTunes, etc. Blogs, social network and social media, which emerged around 2004, Flickr, YouTube, MySpace, for those of you who are young enough, Facebook, Twitter, and single media sharing sites and social networks in other languages. And of course, mobile computing, smartphones, tablets, ultra portables, mini iPads. So what happens to this database form, right, which I saw is kind of emerging in the web in the 90s, and what I really meant when I talk about database in the 90s was not a real database, not MySQL. I never actually used it at the time. I was just thinking about all these websites where you get catalog of items. Like, here's my favorite sites, or you go to a radio station website where you have all the shows. As opposed to a kind of broadcasting model, right, of a linear presentation, linear organization, on the web, the model is more spatial. It's kind of catalogs of items. So this is what I saw in the 90s, and I wrote about it. So what happens to this form 15 years later? Does it still dominate our web experience? Well, I would like to suggest that in social media as it developed until now, let's say 2004, 2012, the database is no longer central. Instead, social media brings forward a new form, a data stream. Instead of browsing and searching a collection of objects, user experiences the continuous flow of events. New events appear on the top, push the early ones from immediate view. The most important event is always the one which is about to appear next, because it heightens the experience of data present. And all events below immediately become world news, still worth reading, but not in the same category. So of course, right, you understand that the data streams of Facebook and Twitter are perfect examples of this information form. Like in the center of Facebook, as you know, a newsfeed, featuring an updated list of user friends' activities, conversation status, updates, profile changes, other types of events. And of course, Twitter design also puts forward the social stream experience, Now, depending on how many users you follow, the experience may be more ambient. Like if you just have few people, you get this very frequent updates. If you follow lots of people, right, it's very dynamic. Right? It's almost like avant-garde montage field, right? Lots of shots, right? Shots for one frame length. We need tweets from different users appearing rapidly one after another. According to a recent version of a Twitter Help article, currently each user is limited to posting 1,000 tweets a day. Okay, so you can't make it faster than that. And normally you're allowed to follow only up to 2,000 users. If you want to follow more, the Twitter has to allow you to do that. Now, in Facebook and Twitter interfaces, individual broadcasts from spatially distributed users are formatted into a single constantly growing, how do we call it, montage? But since no single author organizes this montage, the events often have no connection to each other, so montage is actually not the best form. Now we also can't compare this data stream with a serialist intentional juxtapositions of completely related objects. Because if you have many friends with similar backgrounds and interests, at least parts of your stream are likely to refer to similar topics and experiences. So it's not really serialist juxtaposition as well, right? And it's not montage. It's not about noise. It's not about lots of things that don't connect. It's actually about certain topics which appear in succession. Now, in data stream of social networks during their first stage, which is until about 1 month ago, right, its own past was not only displayed by the present, but it was often not long available for users. So until recently, in Twitter, you could search both your own and other users' timelines, but only up to 3,200 most recent tweets. This means that the past was not measured in familiar time units like days, but the past was measured in number of messages. So depending on how frequently a particular user tweets, 3,200 tweets can take you back years or only a few days. Now, as you know, Twitter is now rolling out a feature where at least you can download supposedly all your tweets. I'm waiting for it to appear in my Twitter account. And Facebook made a big announcement earlier this year when it says a fundamental new stage of the service, Facebook search. So how does the addition of search changes data stream form? Well, in general, I would say the presence or absence of such function is really crucial for understanding different web interfaces in this, what I call information forms. Because if the search function is not present or is limited, like it was in Twitter, the layout of information is important because this is how users access and navigate it. So what's the layout of Facebook timeline in newsfeed really matters. But if a user can search information, its original organization and layout becomes less important. Now, let's continue, right? Taken as a whole, the web is kind of invisible. The web itself as a whole, always, 14 or so billion pages, which we can see, it doesn't even have information form. Now, there are always visualizations of web topology, which shows the links, but we don't show actual pages. So people don't really use, these kind of web browsers, which allow you to navigate through a web showing you a network. Very nice artistic project in the 90s, but people don't use them. So what's interesting is that the hyperlinked nature, the hyperlinked structure of web is actually less important for your experience than the format of the search results. So what web is really about is the way Google or Bing, format search results as a kind of single ordered columns. This is what the web really is, Because we often usually interact with web for search. In other words, the web reveals itself to us not as a network, but as a linear list of pages relevant to particular search terms. So the web is a kind of fictional term, Of course, each massive social data construct of our time, the web, Wikipedia, Twitter, Facebook, is also invisible as a whole because of our data size, but in a different way. So we can say that each social kind of data construct has different kinds of limited visibilities. With some, we can only see one atom at a time. So Wikipedia is a good example. Normally you look at one page. With others such as Twitter and Facebook, where interfaces can show us the hierarchy of a few different levels of information. We can move back and forth between individual posts, all recent posts, by one user, and an assemblage of posts by different users presented in a single stream with the main window on a Facebook newsfeed. So Relator gives us a small window into a whole of Twitter and Facebook, or rather a particular non-random sample, since we selected who to follow. So I think that this 3-week window creates a different experience in the web browser. Now this movement back and forth between different levels and types of information, right? Between looking at one page, and then looking at a list of pages, between looking at one post, and then looking at all the posts, right? Is another characteristic feature of our interaction with social media. So when you're reading a book, right, a different information form, yeah, sometimes you go look at the table of contents, sometimes you go to index, but mostly you spend 99% of the time reading a book. So web information forms, you can constantly move in and out of hierarchy. So although you can't really use these interfaces to do kind of data analytics, to understand patterns in the web, this kind of movement is in fact similar to what data analysts do when we use social media analysis sites, right? Or when you use Google Analytics. To a certain extent, it's the same logic, right? Of going between general, in particular zooming in and zooming out, which is how you see patterns. So we look at data analysts, right? Interestingly, while social networks, as their name implies, identify themselves as a sense of connection between people and other entities, nowhere in their interfaces we see representations of these networks. But there is no representation of a network, right, in Facebook with the interface. It's kind of very paradoxical. To see the graph showing your friend's network, yeah, we need to use a third-party app. This is an amazing paradox. Well, of course, we can explain it away as a design necessity for a typical user, a visual representation, right? A graph of a complete network of all your friends, likes, messages, and other connections will be too dense to be readable. But that still doesn't explain why the sites, right, including our darling Wikipedia, do not use any images of networks at all. Thus, although you might expect that as a word social network, right, would imply, that network diagram would be the icon, right, of the kind of information society, and in particular of social media and social networks, is not the case. Instead, social network uses this kind of one-dimensional stream as its preferred form. Let's see, maybe I just say 2 minutes about timeline and database. So what about the database? So in the 90s with databases, by which I actually meant kind of catalogs, so I didn't use the word database correctly, although I did explain it in my article. So database in the sense of catalogs of items which do not have a single default sort order, and which can be searched and filtered by users, we don't disappear, we expand tremendously, right, in scale. So we have archive.org, right, a database of how many billions of web pages, Amazon, iTunes, Flickr, right, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, etc. So this new kind of, right, databases plus have two main characteristics, right, two main forms, hierarchical categories, right, and search. So on Amazon you have hierarchy, right, of products, and you can also search. And then these two forms are supplemented by other technologies, such as recommendations, list of latest items for user watch, listen to, read, and purchase. Now what's important is that these interfaces, which we use as given, only reveal a very small number of functions which a database organization makes possible, right? So the administrators, right, the marketers, the scientists, the computer scientists who work with companies will have many more abilities to work with database information than the user can. With search, users can only match or filter information, but do not perform any more powerful operations. So finally, I will make last point. In the 20th century, the database, right, after 1950, was also dominating. First, it was one type of database. Eventually, after 69, it becomes a relational database. But the databases were carefully built out of existing data before we would be put in front of the users who could now work with structured data. The data was collected and organized, and typically it came from a single agency and company. But in the world of social media, the gathering of data itself, the gathering of social data, right, the kind of collection of digital traces, digital shadows, constitutes a major challenge because it's spread over many data streams which are constantly growing, and each source requires its own method of collecting, because each source has different API. There is no single database containing all this data. Right? instead of companies offering expensive social network service, like not like the free ones, where you can basically only mine patterns around your single website, your single Twitter account. But for example, if I'm Coca-Cola, right, and I'm hiring a company, and they're going to aggregate all the blogs, Twitter, YouTube, everything to tell me what are people saying about my brand every day, which means they're much more expensive. But each company, right, only offers one aggregation. It only shows a map. It basically gives you a map. It shows only some parts of its territory. So to conclude, I would say that, right, creating a 100% complete in real-time map of all activities of all web users is a new kind of fetish and a new mapping challenge in the early 21st century. Not dissimilar to a quest to construct the accurate map of the Earth 500 years later. But the difference that today, the territory being mapped is constantly growing in size and it's changing every second. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sophia Drakopoulou, and she will be speaking on the live now, observing the changes in the spatiotemporal experience of everyday life through the use of ICTs.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Sophia Drakopoulou. I teach in Middlesex University and also run the BA in Media and Cultural Studies. And my research field is on the use of ICTs in the urban environment and the kind of effects that brings to the spatiotemporal experience. I've cut the title a little bit short than the one I submitted. And I will generally talk about some research done on mobile media and the kind of content that is circulated in text messages and the camera phone image and how it has temporal qualities that aid to its meaning. And then I will discuss content in social media that kind of presents rhythms of everyday life, drawing from Henri Lefebvre and a little bit of Henri Bergson. So now just an overview, moving from the 90s to the 2010s, the kind of, cyberspace has come down to the material world. There is no longer a distinction between sort of cyberspace and living in the city. Instantaneous communication technologies are intertwined with rhythms of everyday life. We use our smart devices to regulate our timings, our relationships, and so on. And this paper really focuses on the content that we sort of exchange between us and upload in social media websites, which is short, concise text, pictures and video. And I will sort of conclude with the idea of the culture of the now, sort of constantly reproducing the now in our in the interfaces we use. So this is quite a lengthy text. I will sort of summarize it, but it is sociology-based research on the use of text messages. I know that the States were a little bit picked up SMS a little bit later than Europe, but I think it's very established here as well. So SMS, as we all know, it brings flexibility in the way that we arrange our meetings, how we circulate in the city, how we manage our relationships. But it's also about expressing feelings in our present moment in time, how we feel, what we are about to do next. So in a way, the sort of content that we circulate in text messages has to do with the recent past and the immediate future. Where we are now, what we are about to do next. So in a way, we're mediating our present state of consciousness. We're sort of communicating that. And obviously, the most common phrase in text messaging is, "Where are you now?" Equally, though, there are some sort of temporal characteristics that aid the meaning of a text message. So, for example, the time. The speed of reply, is important, or the frequency and duration of exchange. And what's very important when it's coming out in mobile media is that the sort of meaning is prominent and tied to the time it was compiled and the sort of proximity from compiling it and viewing it. Now, moving on to the camera phone image and sort of drawing on the fact that the multimedia messaging never picked up. It was never popular. And there are lots of sort of reasons for that. You know, obviously the image is ambiguous. You know, you only always need to use text to sort of anchor the meaning of the image. So it was never popular. But the sort of research done in the States and in Europe emphasizes the fact that most of camera phone images are made to be shared. They may be shared in a moment, they may be shared in an ad hoc network, and most likely they will be uploaded on a social media networking site. But to that, again, the proximity from capture to view is important. So it turns out that most of the images are sort of shared whilst the event is taking place. Dry mouth, I'm sorry. And the sort of provenance of the image sort of fades away as the time passes. So the sort of camera phone image is made to be shared, and it has to be shared in the moment while the event is taking place. Now, to that, the meaning of that image is sort of relevant to a peer network of friends. Is it a small network or is it a large network on Facebook? It is a kind of enclosed meaning in the sharing of the camera phone image. So thinking of that idea of the sort of, you know, what I said, the reproduction of the now, and a sort of mini genealogy of text messaging as short, concise text, communicating feelings, aspirations, and so on. Okay, we can begin with the telegraph, move on to ICQ for the older people here, SMS, and then that brings us to the status update capture. So we can see the status update on Twitter and Facebook as a derivative of the practice first established in text messaging, which is short, concise text, feelings, aspirations of that moment, communicated to a peer, small or large network. But obviously, and we have user-generated content, which I will briefly talk in a moment. But obviously, because this content is meant to be shared, there is a level of performativity within it. Equally with Facebook and the introduction of the timeline, now is always now on Facebook. Yeah, we're sort of always in the moment. I won't dwell too much on user-generated content because it's a whole thing in itself. But again, what comes out in the image of user-generated content, whatever site is using it, whatever ideology is serving, and so on, is that again, the meaning is prominent if the proximity from compiling and viewing is short. Yeah, so when time passes, user-generated content is no longer as important as viewing it a few hours after the event took place. And obviously, the low jerky image adds to the authentic character. How am I doing with time? Okay, the theory bit, I'll go through it very quickly. But Bergson's idea of duration is a kind of mix of memory, sensory stimulants, and extensities. Deleuze in Cinema 1 has talked about it, memory, image, and so on. But for me, what serves in this paper is that idea of making up reality through this kind of mix of memory, images, being in the present. And with that, Lefebvre's idea of rhythm and rhythm analysis has some common elements. Lefebvre moves away from the representational approach in the production of space, and in his work, Rhythm Analysis, he centers on the body, and it's more of a sort of temporal analysis of how we experience everyday life and what kind of rhythms we have in everyday life. So we have cyclical rhythms and linear rhythms, and the rhythm analysis must study those rhythms, analyze them, be part of them, and so on. There are some commonalities between the two theories, which I center my sort of methodology here, which is about the lived experience, that reality is something always in the making. Now, the common sort of elements between the two men is the idea and the theory of moments, examining the moment outside the systems of measurement in Bergson and outside sort of representational practices in Lefebvre, but they both, in a way, give an autonomy to the body. Yeah, that the body for Lefebvre is the sort of last domain of resistance. Yeah, and for Bergson, duration, the sort of bodily sensation of duration, is aside the outside systems of measurement and so on. So what connects them both is the reality of the lived experience. This is, for me, what they sort of examine and what is common to them. Okay, I went with the theory really fast. I'm sorry about that, but it's the construction of the 15 minutes presentation. So now we'll move a little bit to the case studies. And here I have what my friends uploaded on Facebook when it was snowing in London, which I'm sure has unfolded in all of your Facebook accounts when it snows, when there is a celestial phenomenon or an event. You know, obviously they're not necessarily informational, yeah, they're just about sort of documenting everyday life, a walk in the park. Some may be unusual, you know, you have your sort of funny snowman and so on. But again, you know, on the bottom right, Wessel is documenting his view from his bedroom, his workplace. So we are all about sort of sharing those moments and, as I say, the kind of performativity that there is there. I think we've crashed. There is a website called the Rhythm of Capitalism, set up by students in Holland. And they sort of have short video clips of rhythms of everyday life. Equally, there are electronic maps where you can annotate them and leave little short video clips. And the PowerPoint just crashed. I will show you these websites. But my inquiry is sort of saying, are these examples ways to observe the rhythms of everyday life? So are these short video clips tools for the rhythm analysis to sort of make a study of the rhythms, or is it the production and reproduction of the now? So on one hand, we can say that sort of social media and the sort of content that described them, the browser crashed, is that they have a street level viewpoint, which is important because for Lefebvre it's all about observing rhythms of everyday life from the street level. Yeah. They have this element of snapshotting reality, yeah, of taking a moment and sort of sharing it with everyone. So at one hand, could we say that there are tools for the rhythm analysis, or are they just reproducing the now? So in that sense, are we always living in the moment? Yeah, the sort of tyranny of the now. How am I doing with time? I can finish. Then I just see if my examples are working. was going to happen, wasn't it? Well, I had InstaSearch, yeah, which is a data stream. And I wanted to show you a comparison between London and Athens and just the city images that arise from there. And I wanted to show you the maybe.org and, there we are, that works. So on the left-hand side, we have the rhythm, capitalism, which is sort of short video clips, coffee makers, the sea, and so on. And on the right-hand side, I have little videos from Athens, obviously due to the climate, you know, they're more political, let's say. Yeah, so it's about sort of recreation, graffiti, running out of time to explain everything, but going back to my questions, and I would open it up to you, yeah, to sort of discuss those elements. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Caitie Kealy, speaking about viral velocity, states of interaction in meaningful.
School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And this is part of this is a continuation of what I wrote for my undergraduate thesis. So, the thing about addressing meme culture is that it's slippery, both in the objects it refers to and the terms used to discuss it. You can't look it in the face and ask about its intentions, nor its inspiration, methodology, or approach to keeping itself afloat. Even in individual cases, say a lolcat or a Hey Girl captioned image of Ryan Gosling, there is not one specific object to critique. Or, if there is, it's difficult to say what that object would be. Instead, what we do have are the flows of information, data feeds, trending topics, and viral content. These things are hard to generalize about given the individual context they evolve in, but it's the web that allows them to move and progress the way they do. It's the web that allows them to be part of a continuous production and at the same time susceptible to existing only for the short term. The research involved in this presentation is a continuation of my undergraduate thesis, which I completed and presented almost a year ago now. I began a presentation of my work with an image of the Chrome 2012 poster, an image that at the time was already beginning to lose its stronghold on the hashtag market. I knew that for many of my peers in the audience, this reference would already seem dated. The Coney thing came and went, already overshadowed by the TMZ-captured public meltdown of the video's creator. For others in the audience, lots of proud parents and teachers, the image might very well have been projected right over their heads, something they later come to conclude. Despite the many memes that have blown up and faded between then and now, it still sounds weird to say what it was like to experience them at the time. Partly because I'm still able to say what it is like to experience them now. What is it to view a formerly viral video, a done meme? When do these statuses expire? The questions I have are not so much about why certain things go viral, or what it says about the attention economy they derive support from, but of what impact the mobility, speed, and duration of these objects has in terms of temporal experience. It's important to remember that, even as autonomous users that influence how our web platforms evolve, the web we know isn't as idyllic a terrain as it's made out to be. The user activity facilitated by the platforms of Web 2.0 have all sort of accumulated under the umbrella description of participatory culture. This is a space in which we are encouraged to act with what is before us. We are given a set of opportunistic gestures to like, add, share, etc. This is unlike the former role of the passive consumer, removed and alienated from production. Now, we are told, we have tapped into the interactive space of the web, where the ruling ideologies promote its free and open qualities. But as accessible and seemingly open as the web purports to be, It is a space already mapped out before its users interact with its offerings. It is a construct that we submit to, one we are activating rather than actively engaging in. These interactions take place on a screen, a format that's resulted in many of us differentiating from real space. So we often talk about the web as somehow separate from the real world because, yeah, sometimes talking to someone on Facebook feels a lot less risky than it does in real life. But for most people I know, this kind of separation is impossible to maintain. We use the internet to talk about what's happening in the real world and talk about the internet in our real lives. The binary of online, offline is more of an aesthetic implication than an actuality. When visually mapped out, the web might appear like an elsewhere compared to here, but these spaces intersect in a million little topographic points that don't always register during our experience of them. You don't have to get online to access data. It comes to you, and increasingly comes with you. It seems a little messier when it comes to the temporal aspects of the web. There's no way to shake the divisions of past, present, and future. Time is time. It's not really going to change. But when it comes to meme culture, the culture that relies on transience is its keystone. These divisions aren't so clean-cut. A meme unsupported by participants isn't really a meme at all. It needs mobility and activity to be recognized as such. Often, we use the word event to section off a particular unit of time from the drone of our otherwise continuous and linear realities. An event contains things and functions as a container for something else. It doesn't actually present evidence of what it is signifying until after the fact. Clicking through linked content doesn't feel so much like a series of discrete events, so much as a continuous flow of information. Even when scrolling through your browser history, these past visits can be clicked into the present in a way that ensures a constant flow. The web will continuously confirm here and now. Lyotard has previously reflected on this moment of here and now as belonging to the illusory category of the sublime. For Lyotard, the question is not so much what happens as that it happens. The question of what happens is always presupposed by the fact that it happens, or has already happened, making it possible to question what is contained in happening. The event, as he puts it, happens as a question mark before happening as a question. With the advent of real-time streaming, we can experience what we have decidedly termed the now. The here, however, is complicated by the screen's mediation. This is the felt paradox of virtual reality. It is both present and distant at the same time. The other day while I was checking my newsfeed, someone with whom I shared a number of mutual friends was on the receiving end of some type of spam virus. As a result of what was probably a regrettable click, an automated spam bot distributed to each of his contacts a personalized copy. It read, "Ha ha ha ha, Caitie, what were you doing in this video?" I'll admit that for a second I was concerned. What have I been doing? However, I'm familiar enough with spam rhetoric to know better. I did not click. But I did sit and watch as my real-time feed was flooded with posts to hundreds of people's profiles, acting on what was apparently its own accord. This sort of thing is not easily experienced anywhere other than when present before a screen. So does this mean that it's possible to have a sublime experience on the web? Lyotard's concerns with the event is primarily something that happens before it becomes significant, provides some leeway to think of events as more akin to a gauge or an index. An event is a symptom that solicits our attention, and often forces a distinction between the eventful and non-eventful. When a video or any media goes viral, the irrefutable truth is that it happens. It does not need to be furnished with any amount of significance to do so. If we must categorize, we would likely differentiate on the basis of what happened. The trajectory of a viral video certainly appears as serendipitous. It earns its badge as phenomenon by the same vestige. When millions are viewing a YouTube video of a 3-year-old girl crying while professing her love for Justin Bieber, it's because the spectacle appears from the bottom up, unconstructed, not really made for our eyes, but somehow, by chance or random occurrence, a spectacle that we get to witness. A viral video is more or less an unanticipated occurrence that, by virtue of its very virality, is not contained to a pre-established flow. There is no discernible significance to why we watch. The video clamors for meaning as it attracts more and more viewers. The latent ability of sites like YouTube to effectively eat time is an important part of its MO. This is largely the platform's function, to create a network of related content. When the circumstances sway, and part of this content ends up on a viral trajectory, it announces itself boldly as an assertion of the web's potential for unfolding phenomena. It appears as irrefutable proof that, by numbers alone, there is something important happening. Yet within this diligent aggregate of users, these so-called members of participatory culture, you could explain what exactly the importance of such phenomena might be. If there are 2 million people watching, then we too meet in on the joke. We desire to be part of something, no matter what that something is. It's a less palpable form of peer pressure. If, as events, the content of these viral videos are resistant to categorical meaning, it is because once fragmented, there is no longer a place for it to be situated. Instead, it picks up tenor in the liminal spaces, the link sharing, the number of Facebook likes, the peer-to-peer exchange. The significance is in the threshold of the social. I would like to return to the question I posed earlier. Is there anything after viral that is not a decline? Is viral as a status expired? There are many memes and viral videos that feel like ancient history at this point. These videos remain in browser histories billions of users over, but do not remain the impetus for a current. They become the embodiment of a particular time and environment, the category of when, the same that determines that it happened, takes precedence. Will always still part of some flow, these dead viral videos and memes now move in a slightly less commanding way. As much control as we have been able to establish over the natural world, including the natural durations within it, the evolution of technology has progressively commandeered certain aspects of our temporal experiences. Real-time is a manifestation of this idea, desire even, that we can grasp the now. We seek to capture the momentum of the present moment without halting it, so we represent it with a physical movement. We are ensured of the interaction by the visual presence of action. Refreshing your Facebook newsfeed in order to stay updated is part of an impulse to visually register change. We don't see it, it didn't happen. The clicking refresh is no longer necessary. In real time, this change is enacted for you. The ways in which we measure time are not likely to change. A second will always remain a second, a minute a minute. But the value we attribute to these units is elastic. It moves as we move. Now, more than ever, a second is worth a lot of time. We've overstuffed it with our self-imposed need for speed. And when things do happen in a way that we perceive to be slow, we're instantly anxious. If the video takes too long to load, we don't watch it. If the Wi-Fi is too slow, we get disgruntled, sometimes enough to relocate. And in the moments when this flow stalls, when we are forced to stare at a loading image for too long, the anxiety of wait that we have convincingly conquered with technology rears its pixelated head and punctures the safe haven of continuity we have constructed for ourselves.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Piergiorgio Degli Esposti, who will be speaking on death on Facebook, mourning and memory as a prosumer activity.
My name is Piergiorgio Degli Esposti. I'm from Bologna University and teach market and consumption behavior. I started working on this project because I lost a friend and his profile is still active through the cooperation of friends that still keep his password and keep his profile alive on the network. And going through this life experience, I discovered there are other situations similar to that there are very many cases of a live profile of that person. So basically, the main hypothesis of this paper is that the activity of Facebook user in the process of remembrance and mourning may be considered as a form of presumption. The technology evolution and the digitalization process have introduced a new paradigm that cannot be ignored by social scientists. Within this framework, the social network site has a function similar to the so-called cathedral of consumption in the material world. From this assumption, we will analyze the process of rationalization of communication from one side and the process of de-rationalization of rationality by the other through the proposition of our interpretative model of online. Basically, what happened in the so-called digital mediated grief is that what does it changes is the representation of death. Then the changes in mourning reaction and the cemetery as a segregation of death, and the death 2.0 is linked to the right to remember and the will to forget together. Those are the main point of my talk today. Okay, now we can say that we had the first or the 1.0 mourning and after death service that are data and blood maintenance that you can pay and hire for time and have virtually your life last forever. Like there is an Italian artist project that is called What Time Is It? Where an artist has been filmed saying 1, 2, 3, like today is, and streamed this on a server like a perpetual calendar, and of course is experimenting by an artistic point of view how can he live forever as long as those file stream is active on the web server, as you know. Then, of course, we have email delivered after death. There are numerous examples of long-time deceased persons that leave their memory and their will through email after death or text messages, and obituary memorial and wills. All these points have to be faced and challenged in today's society. As an example, will. Many of the products we consume, like digital books, digital music, basically don't belong to us. Mostly is a contract that we hire with the music provider. Like we do have a contract where we hire music from iTunes, and then when we die, we can't leave our library, our music archive to our relative, because the contract expires exactly when we die. Okay, so these are those tricky thing about consumption and after that service. We can say that that becomes death 2.0 when there was the loss of Michael Jackson. Of course, was the big thing, the big hoax on the internet, and anyone in the world start posting, changing the profile picture, posting a video of Michael Jackson, quoting Michael Jackson, and so on and so forth. And by a certain point of view, we can consider, if we consider Michael Jackson as a brand, okay? So by a commercial point of view, we can say that anyone was trying to increase the value of the brand of Michael Jackson through their consumer activity, because they are endorsing Michael Jackson through their way of remembering him on the social network. And okay, so let's think about a little to some of the main point of death and sociology. Like we have to start from Émile Durkheim and the funeral considered as a ceremony that is assembled to serve the purpose of reaffirming the solidarity of the group. And like the solidarity of the group is reaffirmed and entitled by the relationship on the social network. We are talking about Facebook because, of course, we know it's huge. If we consider it as a nation state, is spread around the world. Just China and India don't have Facebook as a main social network. And so the solidarity of the group is a kind of solidarity of the global village, we can say now, when we talk about the death of a superstar like Michael Jackson was. Then we have to think about talcott person and the active orientation in contemporary society as a deviant orientation to a fatalistic society. And what I want to focus your attention in is Christian Fuchs' position. Fuchs' position, natural death, separation between traditional, archaic, and modern world. The magic and religious projection versus the disenchantment. This is the typical modern way of thinking about death and the segregation of death. When we talk about, okay, skip a slide and then we come back. When we talk about the Jean exchange between life and death, and we think about the modern society, we do have the cemetery right outside the city, like we want to get to hide the death, and we have a separation between the world of live people and the world of death. That is not what is going to happen, and within Facebook is more and more a space where there is a mixing interaction between, or of course it's virtual kind of interaction between alive people, and they can't interact, of course they can't, but like we can hypothesize like a symbolic exchange with the dead. Let's see what is my hypothesis. Like my hypothesis comes from a ritual theory of the Weenies. Weenies belongs to the Disney vocabulary, and like is means a structure that leads behavior. Like when you go into a Disney theme park and you see a magic castle, that magic castle is a Weenie. So it's a structure that leads you to go there. You feel free to move and interact within the Disney World park, but you are not like when you are into an outlet center or into a mall, you think you are free of moving around and following your path. Instead, it's not. Your paths are predicted by marketer strategies. So basically the Weenies are what the Disney staff call those huge structures, like even for Paris, the Tour Eiffel is a Weenie because people tend to go there. Okay, it's a kind of magnet, a point of attraction, we can say. And the main characteristic of the Weenies are that they are centrally perceived, centrally controlled, high-tech controlled, and mostly about what we call the commercial Weenies, like the Disney one, empty of distinctive content. Like they can be replied all around the world, okay? Basically, mutuating the ritual concept of Weenies, we can say that Facebook is a digital Weenies that give us the impression of acting free within an environment, but basically it can leave us the option to say, okay, I like it, but you don't like, as an example. You can post a picture, you can post a link, but you can do other things. Of course, within those options of interaction, you have action. I mean, you can manage content, of course, but basically is a way of what we can say moving the nothing something continuum in the little world, or basically try to put a mutual exchange between life and death people. Okay, mourning as a consumer activity, as we said. If we think about what happened for Michael Jackson, the death industry as the primary, the split between those two. So those who produce the gravestone, the casket, and so on and so forth, and those of consume those kind of stuff. And by the other side, social media has made the consumer also the producer of the mourning and the memorializing process. Like we can say that if we all are the author of our online biography, we are also the author of our online epitaph. Because if we do live in public, we also die in public. I mean, grace remains there. We have to think about this, about what is Facebook policy. Facebook policy about dead people had a strict policy. Like, if you know someone that has died, you have to declare his death and the profile has to be removed. That's the first point I mean. That was the first Facebook policy. You know someone is dead, declare it, the profile will be cancelled. Then, in 2005, Facebook introduced the so-called memorialized profile, like because of a lot of protests about users that want to keep the memory of friend and relative alive, asked for those to keep alive those profile, and those profiles were memorialized into, we can say, a freeze mode. Any kind of interaction could happen between the old friend, but all the interaction, all the timeline remains there, the picture remains there, and so on. Then after 2007 Virginia Tech shooting, the site changed its policy again and allowed comment on the victim profile page. The memorialization process wasn't officially announced, but since 2008, that's very interesting. And before that was an automatized process, like if someone has discovered as dead, was immediately deleted and so on. So basically, now your relative or friend has to fill a declaration form to announce the death, or otherwise don't say nothing and keep mostly of the profile remains alive. What happened to the profile that remains alive? Of course, it's obvious to tell that more and more the population of Facebook increase, more and more the death rate could rise for normal demographic reason. Okay, that's what we can call the possible model of interpretation for what we can call the four ideal type of passed away profile within the network. We have the so-called celebrity. Is the profile of a person where you don't have any personal knowledge, and generally speaking, it's not necessary that this person has a profile. He doesn't have any official profile, like Michael Jackson didn't have, and like Amy Winehouse didn't, and so on. Okay, and of course, within the celebrity kingdom, there are kind of relationship between the not friend but fan, because mostly those are fan pages, or it's not even necessary to have a fan pages to be fan of. Then we do have the martyr, or what we can call the hero or the victim. It's a person that basically becomes famous because of his death, like a soldier, like a victim of a peculiar murder, or anything that made his death famous. Then we do have the two most interesting profiles to my point of view. The so-called phantoms. So those are significant other with memorialized profile. Okay. So basically, there is a typo in the middle. Sorry about that. And the purple one basically are the phantoms. Those that can appear and disappear depend. It's up to you. You want to visit them or not? You can post something or tag them because it's a memorialized profile, and so basically they appear and disappear in your timeline. And then there is the really presumer activity, and it's what I call the zombie. Like my friend is kind of zombie, like he's still alive through the activity of friends that still play like Farmville or whatever for him, still post picture on stuff on basically. And it's 3-year mourning. Like my friend passed away 3 years ago, and the profile is still kept active by the activity of many users. But it's not just my friend. A lot of lung disease and terminal ill have still those profile alive because of the activity of relative and friend, and then basically. What makes the difference between those four ideal types is that there is what we can call, if we consider Facebook as a brand, and what Kevin Roberts called a love brand, we can say that there is some coherence and some deviance with the rule of the brand. Like the consumer most coherent with the rule of the brand tend not to deviate to the rule and follow rigid path, declare the death, and be very coherent with what is the regular behavior of the user. And by the other side, we do have what we consider the most deviant part, or the one who prefer to skip the official rule and try to build what we can say like personal path of meaning in the process of construction of meaning through the Facebook timeline. Okay. Then we have some different possible model of interpretation about what we consider the segregation of death. There is no segregation of death for the celebrities. There is partial segregation of death for the martyr, and for the zombie, and there is no segregation of death at all for the zombie. Then, of course, the sociality comes from all the things that Facebook give you to socialize through. And But the difference is that the zombie somehow is active in this process. And of course, we do have, and I have to come back to the middle slide now, the relationship between enchantment and disenchantment. Okay, and is this like, we can say that we have moved from a modern society to a reflexive modern society. Basically, the modern society was characterized by Weber's word from the removal of the magical. By the other side, if we quote Colin Campbell, we can say that the romantic ethic is the spirit of the consumerism, and the new age and the postmodern are or can be considered part of the same movement. Because they do have a common nomenclature, they have common origin and root in the 60s, and both have the rejection of the Enlightenment project. And so basically we do have two different positions. By side, the rationalization and the bureaucratization of the death, and by the other side, the end of the death taboo in Dylan's world. That's it to me. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'd like to open up the floor for questions.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question of our panelists? And I will refer to me as one of the panelists in the third tense. So when we try to theorize present, including social media, it changes periodically. Often our theories are very good, except we describe something which was the case 4 or 5 years old. And I think we have to be very careful, right? So I love your presentation, but you were theorizing social media that was in 2007. No, the photos are not crappy. Look at Instagram. It's beautiful photos people curate. And also, like all of us, have made too much focus, including me, bad, on the presentness of social media. Well, now Facebook introduces, right, search, so it means it becomes more of a kind of database. And also, look at the YouTube graphs below YouTube videos, right? I mean, or your Flickr graph which shows you how many pictures, right, get accessed, or if you use Google Analytics. So I didn't get to talk about timeline, but the timeline is a counterpart, right, to the kind of presentness of a stream, because you see like access, right, access volume to your website over 5 years. You can figure out exactly this is the page which was most popular in 2007. So there is this other major technology which counteracts presentness, and I think in a certain sense, this, even though I think for everyday user, presentness is still maybe very important, people are aware that we can also search and look at timelines. So it's not just consumption about the now, it's a kind of now plus, right? And I'm guilty as well. Self-criticism, in a kind of Maui style.
Just to say that I uploaded the examples on Twitter. So even though my browser crashed, they're up there for you to see.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. So one of the things that you were getting at in your talk and getting at in your comment, Lev, was this notion that as the web kind of exists in these two forms, and social exists in two forms. One is the stream, the linear, even coming off the web. There's the way that we consume it. But then there's the data-driven component where it's stored across ever vastly growing databases which are trying to merge together. And but it is kind of in that form of the present plus a little bit of the past. It's very mediated. So that at the risk of sounding way too academic, does that mean that the past for social starts to become a tool pretty exclusively of the elites, those who have access to the data scientists, who have access to the big, who pay companies that are paying for, the whole fire hose, to be able to actually mine the past, as opposed to users, the regular common folk who don't have access to those data science tools to look at the graph, the macroscope of the present as well as the past.
I almost agree, minus, right? So what I want to say is that I think, again, it was 2 years ago, you had to pay lots of money to get these very expensive applications or to hire an analytics team. But now there are dozens, actually hundreds of tools, right, which show you various visualizations, graphs, analytics, again, limited to your Twitter account, your Facebook account, and what I was going to say about the timeline, so the kind of where stream emphasizes the now, the timeline emphasizes the exceptional. Right? So basically, looking at the graph, you see here's a spike, right? Or you can set with Google Analytics to send emails when something happens, there's like too many visits to the page. But what's interesting, right? It's a continuum between the free tools and the kind of paid tools, right? So to that extent, we all became data scientists, we all became kind of elites. I mean, I think the key difference, right, is with the free tools as of early 2013, right, you can mine your own sites, your own accounts, whereas if I'm a company, right, I can basically get web signals and TV signals. Everybody's like not limited to one site, what everybody is saying about my brand. But I think what we see, if we know from technology history, slowly the tools for elite eventually kind of become tools for everybody, right? So I think it's, again, it's like we see this gradual democratization, right, of kind of the database. And then, of course, we could talk about once you have database, what interfaces do you get, right? Mm-hmm. So here everybody gets the same interfaces, even if you pay $1,000. You get your map, you get your timeline. It's just like how big the database, right? So maybe we can say the elite versus mass distinction is my database is that much, and your database the whole web. So if you want to mine the whole web for particular trends or mentions, okay, right now this is kind of expensive, right?
Thank you. We're going to take a question from Twitter.
Yeah, this is a question for Sophia from Robin Camille. Your thoughts on Snapchat, forced ephemerality of images / text?
Mm-hmm. My thoughts on it?
Yeah.
Well, I think Lev, sort of said about the artistic intent on one hand in photography, but I think in social media and instantaneous communication, it's more about capturing the moment rather than framing it in an artistic manner. Yeah, but in the sort of idea of snap shooting, I will include text messages and I will include status updates because, as I said, in a way it's a kind of mediation of a present moment. Am I replying the question?
Sounds good to me. Is Robin here?
Yeah.
Okay. Does that answer Robin's question? Whatever you are?
Yeah, I'm just, I think.
Question? Yes.
Hi. I got a question for Piergiorgio about death online. I mean, I think you can always find instances in culture throughout human history where death has activated parts of culture and encouraged creativity. I think it's really interesting to try and draw lines at the point where the internet comes in and how that creativity seems to take on perhaps a more egotistical aspect. So we can look at mass public grief or points of public grief, such as in the wake of Princess Diana's death, which seemed to be in a more traditional format. What I wanted to ask you, I wanted to know if you have an opinion on whether the shift towards, say, I'll give you an example. Lucid Ending was a Reddit user who may or may not have had terminal cancer and performed an Ask Me Anything post, which was flooded with contributions from users. They were making a video, they were suggesting poetry, they were kind of giving a bit of themselves to the process of interpreting and dealing with that grief. Now, do you think that that kind of contribution is beneficial in a kind of broad sense, or even a psychological sense, to how we process grief? Or do you think that that is actually disruptive, it kind of elongates the process, distracting even, muddies the waters of, because I've seen other examples of where a relative of someone who's experienced that more public response has said, these people are just selfish, they just want to, get a bit of airtime in the wake of this person's death. How problematic do you think that is?
Okay, basically I think that the anomaly comes with modernity, is with modernity and the process of bureaucratization of death, the removal of death in society, as Arias said. The problem was the disenchantment comes in that time. Then we can say that with the Web 2.0 and the Facebook, we are coming back to kind of archaic perception of relationship with the death and the enchantment project, we can say. And by what you said about the person with cancer disease, and like I can quote you another experiment of another artist that was an Italian one that had a cancer, and a very rare form of cancer, and he started posting in a blog called The Cure, and a lot of contribution from people were medical contribution, of course, by side, by the other side there was just people writing, come on John, keep going, and stuff like that. Of course, this was not the cure, and the person died, like, you know, but of course all this conversational process was part of the cure, because it was all the relation, the value of the conversation that drive the process of his disease into a different way, instead of doing it to another one, you know. So basically I think that yes, this could be part of the cure, the social interaction between this kind of symbolic exchange.
I guess something that I see through all of these is a focus on interpersonal or effective response between each other. I guess in a very humanist sense, that these systems are very focused on us, and we're embodying them in this conversation we're having now, but what would be the impact or significance in more of a like environmental or structural, physical structural sense, that we're talking about all of how this is significant to how we're communicating and seeing ourselves, but is that in a vacuum, as if it doesn't actually impact the way we're infrastructurally making decisions based on aesthetics that start here, but then impact the way we're designing. So outside of our human sort of narcissism. I don't mean to at the end. At the end.
Well, I mean, well, Pinterest, right? I mean, right, used by lots of people, and 70% females, right? And one of the common uses to kind of curate the collections of things when you buy one, right? Or use of social media in the middle is so-called screen, right? So it's definitely used to organize a physical, from shopping to revolution. I know that's what you meant. So there's nothing virtual about it.
I would say that time will increasingly become an element in designing. I think that our culture, our news are all about UGC, our interfaces are all about streams and timelines. So I think that this kind of influence will continue to grow in other cultural logics, not just sort of interfaces and newsmaking.
Yes.
It's not a reaction than a question, but in all of the presentations it was like time now is becoming to be measured in content rather than quantified, and I was just wondering if you have any idea about the fact that now, I mean, we are constantly producing the present, and how our productivity and the value of life is then measured through and maybe not very explicit, but it's measured in content, and how then your life is kind of valued through this production of the present. And for example, there is this website cloud.com that kind of measures your activity on the web, and kind of gives you a number. You become that number that represents your value. And so what are you thinking about, what do you think about this new valuation of your life, in terms of what do you do online, which is actually what do you do offline too?
Should I go first?
Sure.
I think I'll borrow from Lefebvre. Lefebvre has an analysis about presence and present. Yeah, so presence is a kind of present is the contraband of representation and sort of power and ideology, and presence is experiencing the here and the now through your sort of internal bodily processes and so on. So I won't go in much into that, but when Lefebvre speaks about rhythm analysis and cyclical and linear times, he also uses those terms presence and present. So to the answer to your question, in a way, what we are all discussing is a kind of artificial present. Yeah? And Lefebvre is looking for, well, real is a dodgy word to use, but you know, a comprehension of the here and the now that sits outside the influences, whatever powers we are.
Any other responses? Here. I think actually we're going to draw the session to a close. I want to thank all of our wonderful panelists.